Xander.
Hello everyone, this is Sirr's Movies, the official podcast of SirWaka.com. I'm your host, Sterling Woods. Today I'm joined by
Evan Todd-McCoy.
Sam is off getting married this week. Congratulations to her. She'll be back next week, so look forward to it then. Anyway, welcome to the show. This week we'll be discussing what we've been watching, followed by a full review. This week's movie is Alita: Battle Angel, directed by Robert Rodriguez. You can find more episodes on Spotify, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, and pretty much any other podcast app. And you can contact us directly at sirsmovies@gmail.com or join the Sir's Movies Facebook group. All right, now that that's out the way, let's get started. I've seen a few things this week. I know you have as well. Let's go ahead and jump into it. What have you seen?
Okay, so it's actually been the past couple of weeks. Last week with our double episode, I didn't mention a couple of movies I'd seen right around that time. One of which was a very pleasant surprise. I watched Overlord, which was that World War II it was almost going to be another Cloverfield movie, I guess, but it was kind of a World War II horror war movie that had some interesting I would say some interesting horror elements in it, honestly.
It had monsters in it or something like that. Is that right?
Sort of there's like a subgenre of World War II stuff that deals with like Nazi mysticism and Nazi science experiments, and this movie has some of that. Like it's got this kind of like this thing where it's been long enough where I can spoil a little bit. It's basically like the monsters are kind of derived from science, not. It looked like a vampire movie almost or something, but it's really more science fiction than that.
Oh yeah, that was in the trailers. Like they gave him like super serum or something. They were trying to make a super soldier. It just seemed like a thriller, World War II. It didn't really, look like something I was interested in. But
it's more of a war movie than it is a sci-fi movie, I would say, or a monster movie. It's which kind of surprised me. Like they really do treat it seriously as a war movie. Like there's a bit. It's Operation Overlord, so there's this whole thing where there's a ticking clock. They're trying to get something done so that the Allies can do Normandy, and they're paratroopers. So there's this whole bit with the paratrooper stuff and the plane at the beginning of the movie that's really, really good and kind of feels like their version of the storming of the D-Day storming scene in Saving Private Ryan. And it was all a lot more like physical, less CG than I expected too, which was cool.
Well, you heard it here first. Overlord is basically Saving Private Ryan.
Yep.
All right. What else did you see?
Well, another one I saw was SkyScraper, and I wish I could say that was like a pleasant surprise. Not really. That was a movie. That's the Rock movie. My wife is a huge fan of The Rock. I like him too, although I prefer his legit good movies. We're thinking about doing like once a month watching a Rock movie. I think it'll last a few months. We call it Meathead Mondays, I think is what we're going to call it. And we're going to watch like the Rock's movies, then all of Arnold Schwarzenegger's movies or something. So we started watching SkyScraper anyways, and it's kind of as far as Die Hard ripoffs go, it's okay, Things that I liked about it was, he's missing a leg from his job. He was kind of like it looks like he's a soldier in the trailer, but he's not a soldier. He's some kind of
like
ATF.
SWAT team.
Yeah, SWAT team. I think that's pretty much it. So he's SWAT team guy, and he loses his leg. So that's kind of cool to see a person who's an amputee as an action hero. You don't see that every day. And then Neve Campbell surprised me. I used to love her back in the day. She was a big deal in the late 90s, early aughts when I was coming up. Movies like The Craft and Scream, Wild Things you and I have talked about. And then she pops up in this movie, and she's actually really awesome in it. And gets a lot to do for being the wife character in an action movie. So I was pretty happy with that stuff. And the rest of it was kind of weak or so, kind of mediocre, but not bad.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if I may have talked about this.
You saw it too, right?
Yeah, I think the first 2 episodes of the podcast, when I was kind of doing it solo, I may have talked about it. But actually, I'm one of the people that I liked it, Yep. So I enjoyed it. And it wasn't, as you say, it's not a high quality, highbrow, whatever, top of the shelf action film. It is kind of a little silly and a little B movie, but I think it knows what it is, and I think it really works for what it is. And as you're talking about the amputee stuff, like it's never like mentioned. He doesn't like treat it differently. It's never, the movie doesn't make you sympathize with him because he has one leg. It's just kind of part of who he is. I really like that as well. But yeah, I thought it was solid. Like I said, you said, I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty much, it was well done. It was exactly the movie I thought I was going to go see when I saw The Rock movie about him climbing up a skyscraper or whatever, So like, if you know that's what you're going to see, you're going to get exactly what you want out of it. I think it was solid. But
yeah, there's a couple nice surprises in it too. As action movies sometimes tend to do now, because of the way the funding and the way the release stuff works, there's a lot of there's a sort of subplot in the movie involving a couple of Chinese police officers, Hong Kong police officers specifically, that I don't know if it really belongs in the movie, and it feels like one of those things that gets done so that more Chinese people will go see it in theaters in China, which is like, I've got nothing against that really, but it's kind of, it really, when it's not done super well where it fits really well into the movie you're watching, it becomes a little noticeable that it's something that was added maybe later or was particularly written into something, into the movie to be appealing to a certain demographic. It was kind of strange. It felt out of place. I will say that.
Yeah, but overall, solid movie altogether.
Agreed.
All right, what else have you seen?
Another one, the last movie I'll talk about was The Prodigy, which you can find a spoiler-free review of that up at sirwaka.com. It's a horror movie, but not a particularly good one. So I'm the resident, on the podcast at least, I'm the resident horror guy. I like horror movies. We've kind of touched on that a few times. This particular horror movie is kind of what most people mean when they talk about horror movies being boring or lame. It is exactly that. This is the kind of movie they're thinking of. It doesn't do anything new, has nothing interesting going on. About the most interesting you could ever really like conclude that it is that it's kind of funny in spite of itself. Like, it takes itself deadly seriously, but it's so ridiculous that it becomes funny. There's lots of laughter in my theater when we were watching it. Very little people jumping because they're scared, not a lot of that, but tons of like laughter that, was more us laughing at the movie than laughing with the movie, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I've never been a horror person myself. All horror movies are comedies to me. I don't get any scared. I think I talked about this previously. The Conjuring, there was a moment where a lady was at the top of the attic and you're expecting the little clap sound to come from below, and it came from right next to her. That was a good solid jump, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, it was, actually that may have been what they're going for. Like, I was a little shocked, a little spooked, and I thought that was amusing. I thought that was a fun moment, but that's probably the best horror movie scene that I've seen in the past, 10 years, because I don't, I like suspense movies.
Yeah,
that's my genre of horror. I think actually,
that's fair.
10 Cloverfield Drive, that's the last movie that I watched where I really felt like the whole time you're on the edge of your seat with anticipation. It got your body tight into a ball because you didn't know what was going to happen, that kind of thing. That's not a traditional horror movie, but that's, if I'm thinking I want to go see a horror movie, I'm way more interested in seeing that kind of movie than I am seeing your, Paranormal Activity 6 or whatever's coming out.
Well,
next.
horror is kind of like metal. There's a lot of subgenres. So like, I feel like 10 Cloverfield Lane, besides being a really good movie, you can easily call that a horror movie, I think. And I think suspense is kind of a subgenre of horror. My particular, like another movie you and I talked about, Upgrade, we both loved that. It was on our top 10s last year. That movie, I think, is a horror movie, more or less. It's got action too, but it's a body horror movie. It's about the horror of something invading your body. And that's maybe my favorite subgenre of horror. It used to be like, I used to like a good metaphysical horror movie. Like, I like The Exorcist. I used to like horror movies that were about, possession and ghosts and demons and stuff. Now I find myself leaning more towards movies that are more about technology and, or if not technology, then something Cronenbergish, like where it's about like something, your body turning on you in some way,
Indeed. All right, and that is it for your movies, but you saw a bunch of TV, right?
Yeah,
That was, go ahead.
So, sure, one that's recent and topical is Russian Doll on Netflix. So that one, people have been talking about that. It's kind of a big moment for Natasha Lyonne, who has been around forever, but she hasn't had a TV show of her own yet. And
her biggest role for me was the American Pie movie.
Yeah, for me, I always go to But I'm a Cheerleader, which is super good movie.
That, but that was 20 years ago?
Like well, no, she's in her 30s, so it wasn't 20 years ago. But yeah, it was a long time ago. And Russian Doll is like kind of, hey, like, remember Natasha Lyonne? She's awesome. Check this out. And it's it's funny that we were talking
No, that was 20 years ago on the dot. That was
No
1999.
way.
That was
What?
1999. Yep.
Holy moly! I wonder.
You're getting old, brother. You're getting old.
Holy crap! I wonder how. I didn't see it when it first came out, but I'm shocked because in Russian Doll she's 36, and to me she looks 36, but maybe she's a little bit older than that. In the show anyway, it's kind of one of those like Groundhog Day scenarios where somebody's forced to repeat a loop of their life. And at first, it seems like it's going to be kind of like metaphysical or about big ideas, but it actually over the course of the show, it becomes very intimate. It becomes very much about trauma, about going through something with your family that isn't really that profound. It's kind of a normal, almost kind of like this thing with my family member sucked, and it just kind of ends up becoming very like character study ish. And it's only 8 episodes, 20 minutes an episode, 20 minutes to half an hour. But it's really, really tightly written, really, really well done. All the performances are great. It's a lot of fun. It's funny. It can be serious. So it's kind of like dramedy. I dug it a lot. I think you would like it, Sterling. So you should check it out.
First I thought it was pretty much the Happy Death Day to You or whatever, Happy Death Day movie. But from what I've heard, seen people talk about it, I've heard some reviews that it kind of twists that up a little bit. It's not necessarily Groundhog Day. It's got some more elements to it, and
that's right.
It may actually be pretty interesting to it, so I might check it out. That was Russian Dolls. What else have you seen?
Well, I'll mention Runaways season 2. So Runaways is kind of one of those weird Marvel adjacent shows. So it's not taking place in the MCU, but it's a Hulu show, which is strange now because I guess Disney is going to own Hulu, but. It's like it's based on a Brian K. Vaughan series about the children of a bunch of supervillains in the Marvel universe, and they rebel against their parents because their parents are villains. They find out, and they all have kind of powers or special things about them as well. But the comic books were I read them way later, but they were considered to be like really groundbreaking for being about young people and being about young people's issues. There's lots of like LGBTQ stuff in them, lots of stuff that was pretty edgy like 10, 15 years ago. I can't remember exactly when they came out. I want to say 2008-ish, or maybe even sooner than that. You're probably checking it out, but somewhere in there anyway, and I heard about them a lot later. So they were really good, and the TV show is quite good as well, but I don't know anybody else who watches it. In the first season... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I heard about it. I think last year sometime. I didn't even know it was still on because wasn't really something I was into because it seems like kind of a, the Flash, the Arrow, and Supergirl, all on that same kind of genre. I thought that was one of those. I never actually went to go check it out, but I'm surprised that it's still on, and I guess it's doing well.
Well, it's better than the CW shows for sure. It's not perfect, but it's better than those shows. I'm not a big fan of those though. I only lasted a season and a half with Arrow. I lasted 2 seasons with The Flash. I just can't really stick with those shows. They're too long, really, is the thing. Runaways is like 10 episodes a season, and those CW shows are like 22 episodes. So it's too much wheel spinning. It's too much like episodes that are built out of that 5-act structure around commercials where, they have to keep repeating the plot lines over and over again. And I just, I want it to be a half an hour long. I want it to be 10 episodes long if it can't be a half an hour long, So those shows just always burn me out. But Runaways is the right length, and it's it skews a little bit more adult than I think the CW shows do. Not quite as much as the Netflix Marvel shows, but somewhere in the middle. So it's teenager friendly, but still not for kids.
Okay, and that is it for you, right?
Yeah, that's all I got. What have you been checking out?
I saw a few movies, no TV shows for me this week. I actually tried to watch Leftovers. I got 1 episode in, and I forgot where I left off, and I was so lost. Yeah. I went back to start from the beginning. So I'm definitely going to keep watching it, and I'll see where it goes because you seem to love it, and I've heard great things. So
I'm not quite done with it yet, but I do love it.
I'll be checking it out. All right, my first movie that I've seen is Steven Soderbergh's High Flying Birds. I've heard a lot. High Flying Bird, singular. Yeah, I heard a lot of love for it on the internet and the interwebs, and so I definitely want to go check it out. I'm a big Steven Soderbergh fan. I don't know if I love this one. It's a lot more, I guess, high concept than I thought it would be. I really like the message or kind of the tone of what it's going for. There's a lot of Black positivity. There's a lot of, stuff that not necessarily makes you. I don't know, it makes you think. It makes you think about racial politics, and there's a lot of stuff about the NBA and the NBA being a business and kind of how it treats the players and whatnot, then that's kind of what the movie is about, big picture wise. And I didn't know if I expected that. Because of Soderbergh being the type of director he is and what he's just done, I know the directing style would be kind of different. And because probably his favorite movie of mine is the Ocean's, which is the first one, Ocean's 11, right? Yeah. And that really, I don't know, people hate it, and I don't think they hate it. I think it's become a parody of itself. And then there's Logan Lucky, where it's the same kind of thing, where they kind of called it a ripoff of Ocean's 11. And honestly, I really loved Ocean's 11. I really like you think you're watching one thing and then they cut back and they show you what you were really watching. And they're so much smarter than you. I love that kind of movie. I know I'm a nerd for that kind of stuff. And Logan Lucky kind of was that, but also a little bit more heartfelt. And I teared up at the end. I love that kind of stuff. There's a point in kind of the middle of High Flying Bird where they do a bit of that, where they kind of flash back to something that you saw earlier. And it kind of showed you may not have seen what you thought you were seeing, kind of thing, but that doesn't really go anywhere. I feel like the end of the movie was missing one of those wrap-up scenes where you kind of you understand everything you've seen, because there is a little bit of a moment at the end of the movie, but it feels so anticlimactic. It doesn't land the way an Ocean's 11 will do, because it's just kind of talky. And I mean, I guess you understand intellectually what happened, but you don't really get that. That light bulb type moment that you got with the Ocean's 11 and the Logan Lucky kind of movie. So
yeah, where it kind of comes together in like a clever way where you kind of sit back and you're like nodding or you're kind of grinning at it and you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah, had this movie had that scene, I feel like I would have loved it a lot more. But because it didn't, I felt like he was going for a more, I don't know, artistic type vibe, and it didn't really land for me. Like I said, there's a lot of Black positivity stuff. There's a lot of, message type stuff in it. And then there's a lot of, for sports fans, NBA fans, there's a lot of NBA stuff in it that makes you think about being a player and kind of big picture what that means. And there's a lot of commentary on the sports world and how they treat players and that kind of stuff. And that was great. I'm not a huge sports fan, but I appreciate it for what it was. But I think the big media kind of talk about this is that it was shot on the iPhone. So I think that you can definitely tell by some of the camera choices and the camera angle, something was a little off about it. You can really feel that watching this movie, which is, I guess, another layer to the artistic type vibe he was going for. But yeah, like I said, I think I say this all the time, but I appreciated it more than I liked it. I think it was missing something at the end to kind of put a bow on it and make me enjoy this movie. But yeah, all in all, I liked Andre Holland. I love what he's doing these days.
Yeah.
I started the Hulu show, Castle Rock. I never kind of got into it. I kind of fell out for me, but again, it's interesting. He's been doing a lot of stuff lately. I like to see him. And definitely Melvin Gregg. I recognize him from, the internet. He does a lot of skits and stuff like that. And he's just some, you see a lot of random, quote unquote, influencers on the internet that, they just make funny videos every now and then. But he's turned that into a movie career. Yeah, he was doing the Netflix show. What is it? The one where they were American Vandal. Yeah, he did American Vandal season 2. He was really good in that. You could really appreciate his performance. It wasn't, he was playing a type, but he really brought something to performance and made it, show that he wasn't just an internet guy. He could really act, and he doubles down on that. You could really appreciate him, his acting skills. He's trying to do better. The role didn't necessarily ask a whole lot of him, but he did good for what he was asked, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what this guy does next. Because this was a pretty big flick. So,
and if I could flip back to Andre Holland for a minute, I watched all of Castle Rock, and it's fantastic. But I'd be curious because, we're talking about horror a little bit earlier, and what kind of horror you feel like is the kind you like. If you ever do finish Castle Rock, I'd be interested to see what you make of it. Because I would think my first instinct would be to say that it does have supernatural elements, of course, but it has a lot of the kind of horror, like the suspense, balled up in your stomach, worrying about people, kind of feeling that you were saying that you appreciate more. It has a lot of that too. So I'd be wondering how you respond to it when you watch the whole show.
Yeah, really, I thought it was straight up supernatural, but I guess by the
it
way
is,
you
but
said that,
but it's it's not leaned on. Like if you read enough Stephen King books, you kind of start to get this this sort of idea about how he writes stuff, and the show is very much, it could have been written by him almost. It's so close to his tone. He likes the supernatural stuff. It's always there. It's like the backbone, but there's always some kind of human story happening. Like he's so good at creating human characters with motivations that are understandable, whether they're good people or bad people. And so that show has a lot of that, and that's where the real tension, the real horrific behavior kind of comes from, is what normal people do in normal situations with a supernatural backdrop, kind of.
Yeah, indeed. And I think I want to wrap it up by talking about Zazie Beetz. I hope I'm pronouncing Zazie correctly. But yeah, she, I love her. She's done, since Atlanta. She's awesome. Oh, yeah. She was in Deadpool. She's got a big career. She's blown up as well. I don't know if I think her character was awesome. I think she played the character perfectly. You could definitely tell who that person is just by her acting. But I don't know if her story arc was fully fleshed out in this one. I think it's kind of given short shrift to where you understand what's going on, but I don't think she was given enough to pad out kind of what her character was here. But overall, I think that's kind of my complaint with the movie in general, to where I think I appreciate it. I know what's going on, but I think it could have done with an extra, 10 minutes or whatever of fleshing out a little bit. But indeed, that was High Flying Bird on Netflix. You can watch it now. Another Netflix thing I saw is Come Sunday. Now, this one is interesting. It was recommended to me by a friend of mine about a pastor, an evangelist pastor. He preached that, the normal, you have to be saved. You have to accept Jesus Christ into your life. That's how you enter your way into heaven. And I guess he had his burning bush moment. He had his God spoke to me moment. He was watching, one of the shows that comes on 1:00 in the morning, where you see starving African children and, give us 35 cents or whatever. And I think there was some kind of tragedy or something like that. And it kind of just hit him emotionally, thinking, what happens to all these people, all these African starving children who never, didn't have, people come out and preach to them the gospel or whatever. And, he had a personal moment with God, and God spoke to him and said, everybody's saved. Just by Jesus' sacrifice, that saved everybody. Yes, we still want you to do good. We still want you to accept Jesus Christ in your heart, but Jesus' sacrifice saved everybody. And surprise, surprise, that is controversial. Yeah. That's a controversial thing to preach on Sunday morning when your sermon is syndicated on radio shows and you've got a big following. That's a controversial thing to say. So obviously he faced a lot of backlash in the community. Honestly, I love the cast here. Jason Segel, one of my favorite comedies of all time, Forgetting Sarah Marshall. He's done a bunch of awesome stuff. I love him on TV shows and stuff. I love Jason Segel, but he's in it. Lakeith Stanfield, who, again, Atlanta, he's, I don't know, the roles he chooses, man, this guy, I don't know, love him as well. Danny Glover's in here for about 45 seconds. Martin Sheen's in here. I don't know, just a huge cast. And this is, like I said, I never heard of it. The only reason I even find out about this movie, I'm sorry I didn't mention, but Chiwetel Ejiofor, sorry.
Chiwetel Ejiofor. I'm sorry to be the guy who can pronounce this one right, can be all things considered. But yeah, that was a debate for some time on a forum I used to be on about how to say his name. And I think somebody eventually finally linked a interview where he kind of uncomfortably had to like, somebody asked him, like flat out asked him, well, how do you say your name? And he had to answer, and it was sort of an uncomfortable moment. But, it's Chiwetel Ejiofor. He's one of my favorite actors working right now. So when I saw him on the top of the IMDb list, when you and I were talking about this movie earlier, before recording, I was like really stoked to watch it, because he hasn't been in anything, I haven't seen him pop up too much lately. Like, he had a year or two where he was in everything, and then he's kind of disappeared. Then he popped up in Doctor Strange, and that was a cool role for him. But
for the listeners at home, this was the star of 12 Years a Slave.
Yes. And Inside Man, supporting. He was in a really good Mammoth movie nobody watched called Red Belt. He's the operative in Serenity for you Firefly fans. Yeah, he's the guy.
Yeah. So speaking of the actual movie, I guess I'll spoil part of it just so you know what to watch, because it's I want to kind of just say what it is. I don't think you can necessarily spoil it. It's based on a true story, so I mean it's real life, so you can only spoil so much. I won't kind of tell how it ends, but I kind of tell you what's going on here. But yeah, he preaches, obviously faces some backlash. Martin Sheen is kind of his mentor, a evangelist himself with on the food chain of evangelists. He's like 2 rungs up. He's the big guy. He kind of adopted him, and So I guess I get kind of generalized and kind of talk what's going on, and then I get to my nitpickies. But yeah, so he has this crisis of conscience moment. He basically the church gives him the side eye, but gives him another chance. But then he goes up there and doubles down on it, and then people start walking out. Starts losing followers, and from there he has to decide whether he's going to keep preaching or what happens from there, because he sticks to his guns. He believes in his heart that God spoke to him, and this is the God's honest truth. So from there, actually, I want to kind of rant a bit, because I got this made me feel some things. I just kind of want to talk for a bit about it.
No, go for it. I won't interrupt.
Yeah. So I guess my bigger issue, I don't know. There's so many levels of what's going on in this movie. First of all, it wears two masks. On one side, it is we talked about briefly before we started recording. There's that I forgot the name of the movie. The movie with the lady whose son falls into the water.
Right.
And she prays to God, and you know what I'm talking about if you've seen the previews. But yeah, there's that movie coming up, and we talk about how there's not a whole lot of earnest Christianity in movies anymore. There's not a lot of love on the internet for religion these days. It's very in to be atheist or in to bash religion, and I don't know. So you don't see a whole lot of earnest Christianity in movies and TVs these days. So that movie is an example, but a lot of time Christian movies are a bit cheesy and a bit not great movies. So anyway, back to this movie. Half of this movie is that. I really appreciate that, because as I say, I'm a Christian myself, and there's that moment where you believe in your heart what you believe at the end of the day. And if you believe in God, if you believe it, you truly believe it, you have to act on that. You have to live that way, And in this movie, he believes in his heart, like in his heart of heart to his core, that God spoke to him and said that everyone is saved no matter what. And if you're a preacher that has been preaching that you have to be saved, you have to, pronounce with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus Christ, et cetera, that's a real crisis of conscience. How do you do that? How do you go up on church and tell, you're the only one saying that? How do you get up on the pulpit and say something like that? Because without a doubt that your church is going to attack you for it. You're going to face a whole lot of backlash for it. And, so there's that side of the movie, and he believes it, and he did it, and he stuck to his convictions, and his life drastically changed because of sticking to that conviction, which is an awesome thing to see in a movie. Like I said, even if religion is problematic these days, I give the producers and the director all that credit for making this movie and it existing. Now, B-side of that, a lot of this is criticizing religion and what religion is. The Martin Sheen character, who I love. I'm a hugest West Wing fan in the world. I love it. So yeah. Anytime I see him, I think West Wing. But yeah, so he plays an old school evangelist white preacher, because this was back in the 80s, I believe. I don't want to lie to you, but yeah, I think it was the 80s. So it was a bit more okay to be that guy. But he has little moments where, because Chiwetel, he is kind of his adopted son. He didn't, his biological son turned out to be gay. So he, banished, I won't say banished, but,
shunned is maybe the word you're looking for?
Shunned, he, ostracized or, whatever, distanced himself from his son because he was gay, and his son ended up killing himself. And the way that movie says that, Martin Sheen's character is like, yeah, I feel bad for him, but, he chose his path and, had to do what I had to do because he was gay, So, that's a terrible thing to say and whatever. And the movie, you clearly show that they're trying to play him to be a bad guy Christian for doing that and having those beliefs. And I understand there are people in the world that genuinely believe like that. And Martin Sheen's clearly like a racist, white guy here. He talks about Chiwetel saying, I love you. And sorry, his name is Carlton in the movie, but Carlton, I love you like a son. I always thought he was my black son. I tell people you're my black son, that kind of thing. He doubles down on that. So you kind of, there's bits in the movie like that. But, Jason Segel's character, I really liked his portrayal. It's kind of both sides of that. Him and Carlton in the movie, they started this church, and it's one of the few churches in the area that has a mixed congregation, black and white. They're very proud of that, but you can kind of tell he's the traditional, waspy kind of Christian that believes kind of what he believes, but the movie doesn't downplay him for that. They kind of, respect him for who he is and what he believes. He's not a bad guy by any means. He, I don't know, he's very earnest and open with Chiwetel, and he's genuinely heartbroken that Carlton, I keep mixing up. Carlton believes what he believes. He's really heartbroken by that. And he says, we started this church together. How can you get on there and say that? And, there's a bit where he's, has to leave. He says, I have to leave the church because, I can't, in my faith, in my believing of Christ, I can't stand beside you while you say that. And that's honestly, you can't fault him for that as well, because, how do you, that's a huge leap of faith if you didn't have that experience yourself. So once again, it's come Sunday on Netflix, so check it out if you're interested.
Well, I definitely will, and I appreciated your take on it, especially as somebody of faith, right? Like it's interesting to hear what you think of a movie like that before I jump into it.
Indeed. All right, so moving on to something much more wild and crazy, kids. Abducted in Plain Sight on Netflix as well. Did you get a chance to see this one?
No, but I've been hearing a lot of the lot of the rumblings about it.
It is something else. I'll put it like that. I know obviously it's about an abduction, and I've heard the little seen the memes on Facebook or whatever about people waiting too long to report their neighbors. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll watch a dark, true crime documentary on Netflix. Let's check it out. And that is not what this is at all. Okay. So there's a family in a small town, and I think it's Pennsylvania, Ohio. It doesn't really matter, but there's a neighbor family that moves in. Nice family. The dad's a little, friendly, spends a lot of time with them. He, where do I begin? So he's very friendly with the younger daughter in an inappropriate level. He takes the daughter, picks her up after school or whatever, and takes her, says, hey, we're going horseback riding. Doesn't come home. 2 days, 3 days. The parents are like, well, we trust this guy, so maybe something's going on. We're not going to call the police yet. Then like a week later, they call the police, and then there's a whole thing about it. He really kidnapped a kid, and they went to Mexico, and they're trying to get married, or, I mean, just that's the tip of the iceberg on what this movie is. Okay. If you haven't seen it, I want to gush. Well, not gush. Well, that's the wrong word to use about this movie. But there's so much messed up craziness going on here. So I don't know. It's hard to talk about without giving it away. And honestly, actually, you know what? If you're worried about spoilers for Abducted in Plain Sight, skip ahead 3 minutes, because it's too wild to not talk about. So here's what happens. The neighbor, I guess he makes good friends with the parents. He says, I've had some trauma in my past, and my therapist says I need to sleep in the bed with little girls to get better. And the parents say, okay. So he literally sleeps in the bed next to this, I think 9-year-old girl for months on end. He, the dad, I guess he thinks the way to get in with the daughter is to, get the parents, approval, just kind of get with them or whatever. So he ends up parking some a ways off with the dad, tells him how sexually he frustrated is, and asks the dad to give him a hand job, and he does. Oh. And then he starts a relationship with the mother. They kiss and make out or whatever, end up, they don't have sex, but everything up to it at one point or whatever.
Is this guy Ted Bundy? Like, what is going on?
He's just a crazy pedophile. So anyway, sleeping next to the daughter, kidnaps her, says he's in love with the 9-year-old girl. They go to Mexico, try to get married. He calls the mom, says, you got to let us come back and drop all charges. Because by then the FBI got involved. He says, you got to let us come back and drop all charges, or else we're not coming back, or something like that, because I'll get arrested when I come back. But so anyway, they let him come back. They end up dropping all the charges, because he says, if you don't drop all the charges, I'm going to tell people how you gave me a hand job and how we made out or whatever. So they drop the charges. They still live next door, and the little 9-year-old girl's in love with him. She, during the trip, he kind of set it up to how, I guess he made her believe that aliens were telling her to fall in love with him, and she believed it because she was 9, And so, I don't know, the story just goes on. All right, so I think my 3 minutes is up, but
that's
the story,
wild, though.
Yeah,
man.
And the story still goes off the rails from there. So that's what this is. I thought I was watching it.
Did you enjoy it? Should I watch this?
No, that's the thing. So I think that's my biggest issue with it. Welcome back, those, for the 3 minutes. Hi, how you doing? So, finishing up Abducted in Plain Sight, I think the story is so wild and salacious or whatever. That's what makes the documentary interesting. The problem, the documentary was very poorly made. I'll put it like that. I don't think the directors did a great job. I think the way they told the story was very muddled. I think they got, the flow was weird. You didn't kind of understand what things were going on. And then the daughter has two different outfits. And obviously this is, 30 or 40 or whatever years later. So she looks different. So when they have her in two different outfits chopping to her, I didn't understand if that was the same woman at first. So it's just, I don't know, the direction and the way it was put together was really weird and not well done, but the actual story was so salacious. That's what got this hooked, and that's what got people talking and making memes and whatnot about it. But if that's your cup of tea,
I don't know.
Go check it out.
Actually, that I'm not sure what I would make of that if I watched it.
Yeah. I see people talking about I'm never going to trust my neighbors again, and I don't think this is the neighbors. I think this is the parents. Okay, because there is hundreds of red flags here. And I know I'm being unfair to them because it's 30 years later in hindsight and all that kind of stuff. But just from the details given in the documentary, they're partially to blame for whatever happened here. But yeah.
Well, I think whenever something crazy happens to kids, you kind of have to at least look at the parents. This isn't always necessarily like, that they're at fault exactly, but I think you got to look at them. So, it's interesting to hear that perspective because I've been hearing about this documentary, but I haven't really heard anybody talk about that yet. So, yeah.
So that's Abducted in Plain Sight on Netflix. Check it out if that sounds interesting to you. My final movie is Charlie Countryman, the Shia LaBeouf 2013 movie, and this is, I guess, I get a negative reputation on the podcast because I hate everything, but this is what I love. This was very kind of weird, told in an interesting way, directed very well. It's an interesting story to tell, first and foremost. So I don't know. I love this from top to bottom. I think you've seen this, right?
No, actually, my brother and I almost watched it once, and then we didn't, and then he did, and he told me, Evan, you got to watch this. And then it was on Netflix sometime after that, and I added it, and then Netflix dumped it at some point, and I forgot, and so I haven't actually thought about it in years. And then when you mentioned it earlier, when we were talking what we were going to talk about, I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's the movie with like 3 different titles that has Shia LaBeouf and Mads Mikkelsen. Holy crap, I haven't thought about that.
Yeah,
but you liked it.
Cast, yeah, I mean, I loved it.
Okay, you loved something.
Yeah, honestly, so I'm a huge Shia LaBeouf fan. Probably, I think I talked about this previously. Anthony Mackie, probably my favorite actor just because of the roles he chooses. But Shia LaBeouf, he's probably up there. Between the two, those are my 2 favorite actors, period.
Really?
Whatever they're in, I'll watch, yes.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody love Shia LaBeouf that much. Yeah, I appreciate him, but what's your favorite performance of his? A lot of people would say American Honey, but I haven't seen that one, so...
I don't, probably this one maybe. I think because this one encapsulates everything I like about him as an actor. Just because his transformation. Because I saw American Honey as well, and the character who he was in that movie is very different from the character who he was in this one. And this was 3 years later. American Honey was 3 years later, 2016. But his physicality was different. He looks like kind of a squirrely, nerdy, awkward kind of guy in this movie, but you can just see that that's acting because he's not that, and he's got so much swag and confidence in a lot of different movies he does. That's all acting, and just the role choices he does is this. Yeah, this is probably this is my favorite Charlie Countryman, just because the movie that it was, the story it tells, and his acting in it. I think it demands some interesting stuff from you. I don't know how many other actors, I'm sure other people could have done it, but off the top of my head, because of what the movie is asking of you, I don't know how many other people could have done it and made it the same movie it was. But I don't know. But long story short, it's about a guy. His mom dies, and I guess he kind of sees the ghost of his mom. He's in a real heartbroken, emotional state, and so he just hops on a plane, completely random country. Just he's in a really emotional state. His mom says go to Bucharest, so he hops on the plane, goes to Bucharest, and I don't know. It's just the story gets kind of weird, and it's really a love story. So obviously, I'm a sucker for those kind of things. But it's a very over the top, just love story about the power of love and, that kind of thing. But I don't know. It was a really interesting story. The cast was crazy. I watched it because it's Shia LaBeouf, and I love his stuff, and I heard this was a big one, so I was like, it's always been on my Netflix list, so I figured I should go ahead and start watching it. I pressed play, and it's just Evan Rachel Wood, Mads Mikkelsen, Vincent D'Onofrio, Aubrey Plaza. Like the cast is bananas. Rupert Grint, so like Rupert Grint was doing a very non-Harry Potter role here. So, but yeah, it's honestly, I really enjoyed it. So definitely,
I'll be checking it out now.
You checking this out. It's probably, like I said, it's probably my favorite Shia LaBeouf role. And if it came out in 2019, I put it on my top 10 list. But,
no, I like him. So I like what he can do. Like Man Down is a movie I saw. The last one I remember watching him in. Because I was rooting for him. He was embarrassing for a while. He's kind of out there embarrassing himself. And then he was due for a comeback, kind of, I thought. And then Fury came out, and he was awesome in that. And he was good in Nymphomaniac, but I didn't see that till a while after it came out. And then Man Down was his other one, where it's like about a guy, and he's it's not clear whether he's got PTSD and he's gone crazy or what's going on. But he single-handedly made that movie, and it's not a very good movie, but he's really, really, really good in it. And anybody who is like a doubter about Shia LaBeouf, that he's actually a legit, really good actor, probably one of the best his age, I would have pointed them to that movie and said, watch this guy single-handedly make you invested in a terrible movie, because that's what he does.
That's what I feel about the guy. Like, I don't know, he's a great actor and chooses really interesting roles that actually demand something of him, and he puts himself into it. Like American Honey, same thing. It's like the movie itself, the story wasn't, I don't know, incredibly layered or deep or whatever, but just the roles and what he does with it, you really know. I mean, without him, I don't know if that movie would have been as good. I think it would have been a whole lot more bland. But yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that's Charlie Countryman. I watched that on Netflix as well. So check that out if you are interested. But that's all we've seen. We've been going on for a while. So I think that's going to lead us to the full review. I saw this 2 days ago. So really been looking forward to talking about this one. So from this point forward, we're doing our full review of Alita, Battle Angel.
You are someone very special.
Hey, kid.
Not just a teenage girl.
Hey, what's your problem?
You can't remember.
What do you mean?
Doc found you in the scrapyard. So you must be from up there.
All right, that was from the trailer for Alita Battle Angel, directed by Robert Rodriguez. And so, I mean, I've been talking for a while, for a little bit. So why don't we start, you start us off, Evan. Let me know, what you think of the movie?
So every year or two, a movie like this comes out, and they never really look like a safe bet. Like, I'm a big fan, generally, of movies of this type, like big, imaginative, world-building heavy, sci-fi epics that try to do a whole lot and kind of tell a classic hero's journey story. But a lot of them don't turn out to be very good. Mortal Engines came out a couple months back, and it was like a terrible version of the same kind of thing this is trying to do. And it was a huge, like, box office misfire to boot. This movie I kind of loved. Like, it has problems, and we can talk about that, but I liked it a lot, and I think that some of that is very managed expectations going in. It surprised me a lot, more than I thought it was going to. And one of the things that surprised me coming into it was I knew Robert Rodriguez was making it, and he can be hit or miss. I definitely liked his early movies a lot, and then he kind of made some bad ones. Then he kind of disappeared into producer-writer land for a while, and now he's kind of coming back a little bit, and I'm kind of glad this is the kind of movie that he came back with. But what surprised me was that it's written by James Cameron, and there's another writer on it too, and that writer did
Alita Kalogridis.
Yeah, I was just about to challenge myself to try to say that name. It's Alita Kalogridis. She's Greek, I believe, is the origin of that name. But she wrote like a whole bunch of Altered Carbon, which is a show I really liked, and she's done a lot of sci-fi stuff. Sorry. So it was cool. Yeah,
and Robert Rodriguez did have a screenplay credit, and obviously it's based on the manga, so the Yukito Kishiro as well. But yeah,
Yukito Kishiro. That graphic novel series is like really old now, and there was like an anime that was like a really big deal in the late '80s, but I never saw it. I never read the manga. I don't think you have either, right? You haven't seen the stuff, right? So we're coming into this like pure as the morning snow. We're not like pocket fans of this already, so this was both of us, the first blush with the character in the world. But it's as anime gets. Like, there hasn't really been a successful live action anime movie yet. This is the first, I would think. I think this movie is a lot better than Ghost in the Shell for sure, and it's a lot better than other kind of anime adjacent movies have been, where they feel like they were adapted from an anime at some point. Like Edge of Tomorrow is based on a light novel. That's probably a better movie, but it's not it's not a manga anime thing. It's a novel. So it's kind of different. But this one is like, if you ever were like, I really want to see manga and anime, but with real people and like big budget effects and stuff, well, this movie has got your back. And in terms of the writing, it kind of feels like a combination of everything all three of these people do particularly well. So Robert Rodriguez is really good at the boilerplate, hero's journey, nuts and bolts storytelling. James Cameron's also really good at that, but he's also good at like world building, like really, really good at that stuff. And I think Lita Kalogridis brings in like a female perspective on having a character that's a heroine unlike any that I think has ever been in an action movie before. And I could talk a bit more about that later. But I could kind of feel like I could feel another voice in there. But what was interesting about the writing in this movie is that I could kind of feel all three of these voices. Partly maybe because I know James Cameron and Robert Rodriguez's work pretty well. Like I've seen almost everything both those guys have done. So I kind of know, I feel like where and this isn't a huge change. Like if you've seen their movies before, you're going to maybe feel that familiarity as well.
Yeah.
So I liked it a lot. That was a big speech. What did you think about it?
Okay, so this is, we normally see movies Thursday nights and watch them, and record the podcast on Friday.
Right.
If I had done that for this movie, I would be a lot more negative than I'm about to be. So I think like I said, when I initially walked out the theater, this was probably a 3 out of 10 for me. I really, just because of the anime-ness of it, just the movie that it was, it really rubbed me the wrong way because of the silly bits, But once, had extra day to sit with it and think about it, and the edges kind of dulled, and I kind of thought about it big picture as what it was. And I like it a bit more now that it's had some time. I've had some time to sit with it. I think the story bits, the anime bits, the manga bits of it, those are the weakest parts for me. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they're not going to be great for an American audience because they're, silly and over the top, and, it's stuff that works in a, for lack of a better word, a cartoon, works in the Naruto fans and the Bleach fans and all that kind of stuff. They're going to get exactly what's going on here, but I don't know if the general audience will appreciate it for what it is, because that stuff is silly and over the top, and it doesn't really work for me. A lot of it, feels awkward, and it made me laugh out loud a bit, especially in the beginning. But I think when it gets going, that's what really works for me. That was awesome. I don't think I've seen action this good in a sci-fi movie. I don't know, maybe ever. I don't know, the action in this was spectacular, especially being a sci-fi and the robots, when they actually get going. I think there were some weaker bits toward the beginning, but when it actually gets going in here, I don't think I've seen action this good on the big screen. So I definitely enjoyed that about it. I don't know, budget-wise, I do like to talk about budget a bit, because I don't know how this is going to do. I think it can go either way.
Well, because if we want to talk about box office, it's 40 million tracking right now, or pulled in. It did better money than the Lego Movie 2.
Well, I mean, that's not a it's not a whole lot to be proud of.
I gotta say, I've been actually, last week I talked about box office, which I don't really care about, and I don't talk about that often because I don't know what I'm talking about. And I proved it last week. I said the Lego Movie 1 made $1 billion. It really made $500 million.
Made a little under $500 million.
No, it was about $500 million, but I exaggerated anyway. And I don't follow this stuff usually, but after that whole conversation, I looked into some stuff about box office, and actually, you said it was excuses, but generally speaking, opening weekend box office is down across the board for like the last 3 years trending. So, and if you look at it for 15 years, it trends even more that way. Movies still make tons and tons and tons of money, but opening weekend box office is not the indicator it used to be, I guess. And some people are panicking about that, and some people are saying, oh, we can just sell it in China. This movie is going to make bank in China. They love sci-fi, high concept fantasy over there for good reason. It's awesome. But so that's all I'll say about box office. But this movie's doing pretty well, though. I don't know if it's doing a sequel well, but it's doing well.
Yeah, that's the thing. So like Lego Movie 2, if they were both predicted to make 40 million, I think for Lego Movie 2 fell short, but that's a good solid week. 40 million is a good solid weekend for that. But this is a $200 million movie. So
is it? I didn't know its budget was so high.
This is $200 million movie. So this has got to do gangbusters.
Yeah.
So I think it will, overseas. I think it's definitely going to, boost the numbers there. But I don't know if American audiences are going to appreciate this the way, overseas audiences will. And I think that's unfortunate. Yeah. I think it is a better movie. I think your Jurassic World 2 was a terrible movie, and overseas audiences appreciated it just because it was built that way, and it wasn't necessarily for American audience. I think it was made for a worldwide audience. And I don't think this is made that same way. I think it was built to be a solid movie, period, at the end of the sentence.
Yeah, they cared,
but it's just made in a manga way. It's based on that, which is why the beginning bits feel a bit weird and, clunky or
and I agree with that, what you said too, getting back to the movie itself. Like I'm not a big manga anime guy. So, some people listening to this might be, though, and they might respond to that more than either of us did. And I mean, you can really hang a lot of the writing problems in this movie, and there are several pretty glaring ones. One of them is like a copious amount of streamlining and a lot of cliches. So those things you can kind of hang that on the peg of like trying to summarize a gigantic manga full of its own manga cliches, maybe, or maybe an inventor of some of them. Trying to do that in a 2-hour-long movie is difficult. But like, I don't love that stuff either. I'm not, so like those problems were there for me as well. But I think that I started falling in love with the movie maybe a little earlier than you did. But I agree with you that it's like really the end of the second act going into the third act when the movie really gets bonkers and action packed that I started to really dig it.
Yeah. So, I mean, just big picture view. I think the previews pretty much tell you what this is, but it's about Christoph Waltz. Obviously, we haven't spoken about him yet, but genius, sci-fi robotics guy. We've seen that in movies before, but he pulls an old robot from a junk heap and puts it together, and that's ends up being a super cool robot. And I think we've actually seen that story before in movies. I have.
Astro Boy.
Yeah, so
for instance,
we've seen that before, but I think this is done well. I think I probably want to talk about the CGI a little bit because that's kind of one of the huge, I don't know about selling points, but that's what a lot of people talked about. The face, I think we're still in Uncanny Valley territory. I think it does look a little, weird, but I do think it's worth the discussion. I think it does look kind of realistic, but I do think, you're not looking at a human face, and I don't know if you're supposed to.
Right.
Because,
I think so. So without spoiling anything, there is, the movie does offer a kind of way out of that issue, because when the movie was being marketed, people were like, well, wait a minute, why? Like, I get having CG characters in movies, that's like normal now, but why is there only one character who's CG and everybody else is like normal looking? And Robert Rodriguez and James Cameron talked about the original video game art and how they wanted it to look like basically a photorealistic version of the manga eyes. I think that's the quote. And that sounds a little flimsy to me. But the movie does have a way of saying, okay, no, it's intentional that she looks a little bit not quite human, because there is an explanation in the movie given for why she looks so artificial compared to other people. In terms of the technology being used, though, I kind of think they're there. Like, I didn't get the Uncanny Valley feeling from this. I don't generally get that feeling anyway, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But when I was watching this, I was expecting to feel like it was weird, but to me, it really wasn't. I got used to it really, really quickly. Part of that, though, I think is down to Rosa Salazar, who completely kills in this role. Like, this should, if there's any justice in the world, she's going to just run off of this movie and deserves it. But, but like that's, I think, a big part of it is that she was very believable. She really sold it. I don't think the technology alone maybe could get us there. You need an Andy Serkis to convince us that Caesar is there, right? So you need a Rosa Salazar to make Alita work, I think.
Yeah, I think honestly, I like the Andy Serkis work better. I think it does. I mean, you're not looking at a human.
He's the master.
Yeah, you're not looking at a human, so it's easier to, I guess, for the brain to accept. I think looking at her face, I see that it's CGI the whole time. It doesn't. Like I said, I think it's partially because she's supposed to be a cyborg, so you're not supposed to, whatever. But I definitely see it a little bit that I know I'm watching the CGI. I think video games definitely have physics down better. I don't think the physics work here. I definitely think there are bits where that you're watching I guess there are levels to it, but there are
levels to it. Yeah. Like there's scenes where they're using a little bit of speed ramping, like they're slowing things down a bit so we can see the action more clearly. That ends up making it look faker than it is. So in the action shot in a way where it would be shot at the same speed if it was physical, the CG ends up being invisible. It looks really good. But if you slow it down to try to like give you like, so in the trailer there's like this bit where she kicks a couple of beer bottles into two guys' faces, and that's one of the fakest shots in the movie. It's really easy to tell that you're watching CG when you see that because they slow it down and they concentrate on it. But most of the action in the movie isn't like that. It's a little bit more like they tried to say, let's do this, let's shoot this, let's make this look like we actually have people in robot like suits running around doing crazy stuff. And it works really well for the movie. I agree with you. It's some of the best action in a big sci-fi movie that I can remember seeing in a long time.
Yeah, indeed. So overall, I think you loved it, and I like it. I don't know. Like I think, like I said, after sitting with a bit, I think it's great. And this is one of the ones where I definitely think, this may be something I buy on Blu-ray or whatever later and watch it again, because I think it was fun to watch. Like I said, there are bits that don't really work for me, but I think overall it's a good it's a good movie to own in your collection. Put it like that.
Well, you can dig into the world too. Like I was saying earlier, the world building in here is really, really good. And like when you're like, it's a kind of movie where kind of like Blade Runner or Star Wars, the old school Star Wars movies, and some like not the new ones as much because they're just doing the thing that the old Star Wars movie did. But they make you believe there's a world beyond what you can see. And this movie has kind of this kind of really junker town called Iron City, and you see just enough of it, and it's cool enough, and you see all these extras and all this cool stuff going on. I'm saying cool a lot. And it makes you feel like, okay, yeah, this is like a real place. It kind of looks like a really junked down, like, Bangkok or something. One of those big cities that's so big that it's growing into itself. And you can feel a little bit of Robert Rodriguez's kind of like Mexico sort of influence there, where some of it feels like a big, overgrown, kind of falling apart city in South America or something. Like, it's got a favela kind of vibe that some versions of sci-fi with a different kind of cultural perspective or national perspective wouldn't have that feeling, and this movie does. And so you kind of just feel like you're in a world where you could walk down the street away from where the movie's taking place, and there's a whole world out there. So I dug that, and that kind of thing I think makes a movie like this worth rewatching, because you'll notice little things, like little details, like robot arms and stuff that you didn't the first time. I think that's cool.
Indeed. And I'll probably give a little pushback on you on Iron City, but that's something for spoilers. So sure. I think it's time to get into it. You know what we thought. So from this point forward, spoilers for Alita, Battle Angel.
I'm not your daughter. I don't know what I am.
I do. You're the most advanced weapon ever.
All right, now that we're in spoilers, this is probably a weird thing to say, but so I watched this movie not too long after watching the Abducted in Plain Sight documentary. So right. The first, 20 minutes of this it made me icky. I guess it's very weird because they're so because it's a cyborg. Obviously, we focus on the body a lot, but at the same time, it's supposed to be like a little girl, you know, and just that aspect of it felt a little weird to me. And then she became, sexualized pretty quickly with I don't want to say sexualized, but the romantic portion of it got pretty, they got into it pretty quick. Cause when he made her and brought her to life or whatever, in my head, she's, 14, something like, I don't know, young anyway.
Yeah. Like 14 or 15, maybe 16 at most. Yeah.
And then when she started moving and got outside or whatever, and had the incident with the meet cute, quote unquote, with the boy, right? I'm like, why are you flirting with this little kid? And then no, that's where they're going. That's what this is, And then they went on from there, and just the romanticness, and there was that moment when they kissed, and it just made me giggle. And it's like, what is this? It just seems so weird, and like that's when in an anime, all the faces look kind of young, vaguely, they're you don't really know how old anime characters are. They're just
Right.
vaguely young people, so it works better there. But she just, I mean, the fact that they kept, pressing on how young she was and how Christoph Waltz talked to her like he was his child. Don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
So she's obviously at a young enough age where you can say, go to your room. You can't really say that to a 17-year-old. It doesn't really work. You feel the same.
Right.
I mean, I guess you can, but it doesn't have the same oomph to it when you're telling a 13-year-old girl to go to her room or whatever. So
I got some takes on this. I got some thoughts. So this is something me and my wife talked about afterward too, because I had the same feeling you did early on. I didn't have as much of a problem with the romance because I felt like the kid was supposed to be like maybe 18 at most, It's just that he's like an orphan, and so she's a little younger. But something my wife pointed out was that, okay, so Christoph Waltz's character, he's a doctor, but he's also what they call a hunter warrior, which is a stupid title for anything. But so he's a hunter warrior, whatever, and he's like treating her like his kid, and he's got his own baggage about kids and stuff anyway. Like his daughter dies and all this. So like this whole thing where he treats her as his kid, this is what's interesting about it. His whole character arc is about realizing that she is her own person and not his kid, and learning to back off and let her be her, because Alita is like an unstoppable badass in this. One of the greatest things about this movie is her, because here's some things, right? She's like a very unique character and kind of the hero that I think a lot of young girls especially are waiting for. So she's a character that's an adrenaline junkie. She doesn't flinch away from violence. She cusses. She kicks a lot of
Apple.
She really likes sports and really likes rough sports. The movie never tries to problematize that or try to act like that's wrong in any way. It lets her have it, but she's also still really feminine. But here's the thing, she's not as young as the body that Dr. Ito puts her in. The nurse, who doesn't get enough lines in the movie, that's one of my gripes with it. She's barely in the movie. She says, hey, it looks like she's older than you thought she was, because she gets a new body later in the movie, and it's a more mature body. And while they don't quite sexualize her, they let you, through a little bit of cinematic language, they let you know that Alita's actual body is more like a 20-year-old woman. It's a little older, a little more developed, right? And that's kind of what they're going for there. So I got the like weirdo feeling too, especially because like the streamlining when Ito takes her, he goes from like picking her up in a junkyard, making her a body, and then treating her like she's his kid, like almost like she belongs to him or whatever, like he's adopted her, like really, really fast. And because of her amnesia, she's just kind of cool with it. If they had left it like that, I would probably have really disliked the movie on that level. But what I really liked about it in the end was that that storyline, they stick with it. They have conflict. She doesn't really accept him as a father figure till very late in the movie. They really go there with that, and I really liked that. I didn't expect that. I thought that was a very solid emotional core for the movie. The romance stuff was a little bit more cliche and tropey, and they try to have some fun with it. There's a few parts where I appreciated the sense of humor they tried to bring to it, but it's pretty intense. Like it's pretty teenage Twilight kind of stuff. And I think that's where this movie is for. Like what I realized when I was watching it, that this movie isn't for me. This movie's for my kid. Like this movie is for 15-year-old girls. That's what this is, And I don't think anybody really expects the anime live action movie to be for 15-year-old girls. They think it's going to be for 35-year-old men, the guys who like anime, right? The anime nerds who tend to be men. So I was surprised at how it's skewed towards that kind of YA, very female friendly, very girl friendly kind of place. And I think Alita, the character, is at the center of that. I that was my favorite part of the movie. I thought she was awesome. Like I couldn't think of a single archetype, an action archetype that she fit into for female characters. There's this really great video series called by Innuendo Studios on YouTube, and it's called Recovering What's Stolen. And really, it's kind of about Mad Max Fury Road and how it upends archetypes of females in action movies. But it ends up talking about generally what kind of roles do we usually put women in movies. And there's like basically 6 archetypes that we always see over and over again. And then the argument is that Mad Max Fury Road breaks that a little bit. It actually makes a new one. And I feel like this movie does too. It might not be quite the same thing as Fury Road, but I feel like Alita's a new kind of character that we haven't really seen before or not seen very often, which I thought was pretty cool.
I don't know. I mean, just looking at the trailers, you knew she was going to be the kick butt girl,
right,
by the end of the movie. So, I mean, just seeing her become that wasn't really a surprise. I think like I said,
For me, it's
as
the
you said, I
journey,
think,
not the destination. Because I'm with you.
well, yes,
you know.
as you said, I think it was very compressed from her
Right.
being a 12-year-old girl when she's first awakened to being, basically Emily Blunt's character in Edge of Tomorrow. You know,
Yeah.
she turns into that. And it's just very compressed. And seeing her, I guess, like I don't know, I guess it is a good kind of teenage moment when she's fallen in love or whatever. When she offers to give him her heart, I was like, that's a very it's a very good teenage girl moment because it's a mix between I'm a grown up, kick butt lady character and also, hey, I'm still a kid and I think I'm in love. So here, take my heart kind of thing, So
And it's really intense because it would be like her first love, right? Because she's this is a spoiler, but we're in spoilers. She's a war machine. She's literally made to be a killing machine. And so her meeting a normal dude and falling in love with him is not something that she would be trained for. The fighting stuff is easy for her. It's the emotional relationship shit that's the core of the movie that's more difficult, right? And I thought the fact that they let her, because you're right. I mean, you can see her being a bad action hero coming a mile away. But the fact that they let her have her femininity and still be a bad apple on her own terms, it kind of reminded me of Wonder Woman, really. Like, where they managed to do both without, because often what happens is the way you make a character who's a bad apple. First, you have to, like a female character, you have to make them traumatized somehow. They have to get beaten or raped or something, or they have to be coded masculine. So there's a famous character in Aliens named Vasquez, right? And she's like a really butch, really tough, like really masculine woman, right? That's usually how we see action hero female characters, or they're traumatized and they get tough because they're trying to fight back against trauma. That's not really what this movie does. It really avoids all that, which is cool.
And probably I wanted to give a little pushback as well on the killing machine because I think maybe it's more explained or more fleshed out in the manga, but in the movie it's really muddled because she's supposed to be the android killer from Mars that is the bad guys in this movie, but because the mutual everybody's bad guy in this movie, the antagonist is not from Mars, then the Martians were fighting against him and the humans, on the Iron City were fighting against him. So I don't think necessarily the movie fleshed out why the Martians were so bad because they're fighting against the same people.
Well, I mean, it's in the movie they don't sequel bait too hard. Like this movie feels like it can be a complete thing. We don't need a sequel, but it does tell you where a sequel could go.
I disagree.
Well, let's get to that in a minute. Let's get to that in a minute. But I think what you're gonna say though is that there is some stuff they don't deal with in this movie, so it makes it feel a little bit muddled. I kind of could see where you're coming from that, but here's the thing. Nova, the bad guy, right, who we don't really see, he's not really the bad guy in this movie. He's kind of the overarching villain. He would be the villain in a sequel. But he's who the who are from Mars, they're all, basically this is what I was talking about earlier where they give a justification for her being CG. So all the look like her. They're all people with CG faces and cyborg bodies. And they're super advanced. They fought a war on Earth 300 years ago, and that war destroyed all these floating cities except for one, and that's the one Nova rules. So we see through flashbacks that Alita 300 years ago was part of an army that was fighting Nova. In particular, they were after Nova. We don't know why, but that's who they're going after. Now in Iron City, they kind of live under, they all kind of serve the Sky City, which is called Zolon or Zolom or something like that. They serve that city, but nobody really knows about Nova. He's not like some shadowy evil master. Only some people know that he even exists. So I don't know. That all came across to me. Is all I'm saying.
All the bad guys know he's the shadow evil
That's
master
true.
or whatever.
But I don't think regular people necessarily know that he's up there pulling the strings, although the movie doesn't really tell you either way, so I'm not near to this point.
I think it's a bit, I don't, and because we see her interacting and having fun or whatever as an robot, I don't know if she necessarily was a killing machine.
We don't see her having fun. We see her doing three things: training, fighting a war, and we see her training and fighting a war. We see her fight one war on the moon. That's all we see. We don't see her doing anything fun or particularly human.
But we see the interpersonal relationships. We see she's not an evil killing.
I wasn't trying to say she was like a Terminator. I just mean Like,
well, I know. I think that's the thing though, because the movie says at the end it's not about. Christoph Waltz's character says it's not about the
body. It's about
your body. It's about who you are inside.
Right.
But I don't think the movie did a good enough job of telling us that the body is an evil killing machine, and she's overcoming that with her personality.
Well, I don't think that I don't think the paradigm that you have there is quite right, because I don't think it's about being an evil killing machine. That's taking it a little bit like. So killing machine, the way I meant it, was like more like a figure of speech, like the way you might say a Marine was a killing machine, you know? Like just being trained and equipped in such a way that you are really comfortable with killing, which Alita is, and that you're very physically capable of doing it, right? Easily and a lot. So that's all I mean. And I think what the theme that Dr. Ito was trying to point out was more about like, you know, just for her not to get hung up on her being a cyborg, really. Like, you know, not that the body is evil, but that the body isn't everything. Because for a little while, she's kind of body focused. She wants the new body. He refuses to give it to her. He wants her to be his daughter. He doesn't want her to grow up. It's a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor for not wanting your children to grow up and come into their own. So eventually he's kind of like, okay, yeah, you can become an adult, but it's not about being an adult. It's about who you are underneath. And so that's like the clearest. I think that's the most important. That's a big theme of the movie, right? Even her big tagline there is, you underestimated who I am, not you underestimated me. You underestimated who I am. And at first I thought that was a dumb line, and then I saw it in the movie itself, and I understood why they changed it to that, because that it kind of dovetails with what you're talking about nicely, you know. But I won't agree though. I won't disagree that it isn't streamlined or compressed though, because it is. You know?
And I think another thing that is muddled is, I guess, what is a cyborg? What is, you know, because the hunter, what is the hunter killers?
The
hunter
killers.
I
wish they were called hunter killers.
See, the hunter warriors. And when we go to the little bar, all of them are cyborg. Well, not all of them, but
I think most of them are, but some of them are more. You can see it more than other ones.
Yeah.
Like some of them are very flashy.
Vast majority of them are, you know, cyborg killer machines with enhanced parts and whatnot. And I guess maybe a few were humans, but it was kind of hard to tell. But I think what the movie got muddled, and I wasn't sure is. Did all of them start human and they just, you know, because at the end of the movie, we find out that you can just take the brain out and put it into a robot body.
I want to talk about that bit.
So, I think before we get to it, I don't think the movie did a good enough job of explaining whether all of the robots were just a different race of, you know, robot people, or whether they started human and humans turned themselves. Because, I mean, throughout the Iron City, most people have at least some type of, you know, robotic enhancement. I guess people are just losing arms left and right because it's a dangerous place. So a lot of people have parts, but I think what was confusing is whether the hunter warriors, hunter warriors, whether they started off as human and they just replaced other parts and became, cyborgs, or whether they just were machines that are sentient.
I think nobody's a sentient machine. There's no artificial intelligence in this movie, which is kind of strange. But considering there are things that look like it, like the Centurion robots and those really awesome robot heads that pop out of the booth at the factory place. I think I started loving the movie when I first saw one of those, because that kind of nonsense delights me. But I was gonna say, I think it's clearer than you think it is. Maybe you wanted a bit more background. I could see that. But to me, it's like, okay, so a cyborg is just a person with robot parts, and in the movie you see kind of 3 levels of that. You see regular people, like the kind of people Dr. Ito works on, where they're, you know, they lost an arm or a leg, and they're you know, they've really junky kind of robot parts. Like they look like parts off of a droid in Star Wars. Like they look like they've seen some stuff. Like they're used, worn out. And then you see the like hunter warriors and the motorballers, because there's this whole thing where this movie is like a sports movie, which I think is really cool too. But the motorball players, they have way more advanced cyborg bodies. All they really have left of their human bodies is like their head, and they do a lot in the movie with that. Like there's a lot of jokes, almost physical, violent jokes about heads getting cut off and stuff. So then there's Alita and their so they're a whole other level. I think their bodies are entirely artificial. I think that Dr. Ito says that, but their brains aren't.
That's the thing.
He does, though. He says that her brains are 100% human.
Yeah, but she's a Martian. The Erms are Martians.
But they're not Martians like aliens. Don't forget, this is hundreds of years from now. So they would have been humans that came from Earth, colonized Mars, started their own country. Kind of like The Expanse. If I don't know if you know that show, but or the books, but maybe some of the kids at home do. So like the idea there would be that the Martians would have eventually waged war against Earth, but they're not alien Martians. They're humans, right?
I don't know if that was explained in the movie that humans migrated to Mars, and then because it would have to been a very long time for the Martians to develop their own.
Is an acronym. So it's
I know.
It would be different if they just called them the and I would think they were aliens then anyway, like if they were just called the and we never knew what meant. But because it's an acronym in English, it's that was pretty clear to me. Although they probably could have, I think the first bit, I think this movie is justified having a little opening crawl, like a Blade Runner style opening crawl, and they don't really do that. They just give you the year, and that's it, and then they just show you like this world.
Well, no, it says X amount of years after the fall.
Yeah, and you're supposed to know what that means, right? But eventually the movie tells you. But I feel like they could have said something like in the year blah blah blah, and they could have explained some of that backstory a bit clearer. I do agree with you about that. I think I picked up enough to not be confused. But then again, I read tons of sci-fi, and I'm kind of primed for something like this, like I've seen this stuff before, so it wasn't super, like I wouldn't use the word muddled, but I think I could go with like something like underexplained. I could go with that.
Yeah. Sure, semantics.
Yeah, you're right. It is semantics. It is semantics. I just think you like that word muddled a lot, but
yeah, that's kind of
it's your go-to word. Yeah, fair enough.
All right, but so you want to talk about the brains being transplanted?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that makes me love a movie like this. Like the dude, the factory produced like took him off an assembly line. White brunette dude they got to play the love interest. He looks like every other guy like him in a role. What's the actor's name? Keanu Johnson. So I haven't seen him in anything before, I don't think. This might be, I think this is his first big role, really. He's pretty good in the movie, don't get me wrong, he's fine. But he gets his head cut off, pardon my French, almost there. He gets his head cut off, and they carry it around, and they stick it on a robot body, and I loved that. I thought that was hilarious. I was laughing and clapping in the theater. I thought that was so good. Just because it just like, I don't know if you've seen Altered Carbon, but there's this idea that pops up.
Didn't.
You did?
No, didn't.
You didn't. Okay. There's this idea that pops up in cyberpunk a lot, and cyberpunk is like my sci-fi genre of choice. This idea that bodies are cheap. If you can download your brain or your mind into
I did see that. Never mind.
You did see Altered Carbon? Okay, so there's this idea though that's different because it's all flesh and blood bodies. They're not robot bodies in that show, but even in stuff like where it is robot bodies, which it is here. There's this idea that bodies are cheap, that death is cheap, that life and flesh don't mean much in a world where you can easily get a robot body, or your life could be saved because they cut your head off and stick you in a freezer, or whatever the case may be. And some stuff, it's like downloading your brain into a computer. In this movie, they really play with that idea a lot, and it makes some of the violence less horrific than it would be otherwise, because a lot of the people that you're seeing die, quote unquote die, they're not really gonna die. They're actually just gonna their body's getting messed up.
Well, you see a couple of them die.
You definitely do see people die. Yeah, don't get me wrong. Alita's a bloodthirsty murderer in this movie, and it's awesome. But she has no qualms at all about killing folks. But there is a certain amount to which though that it's less. It's like John Wick kind of it's like it doesn't. Life is cheap, and the bullets fly freely, kind of like it's sort of like that in a way. And I thought that bit with, to me though, like one of the places where they get a little mean. What did you think? Let me ask you, what did you think of Jennifer Connelly's death in the movie? Her character, Shiren.
I guess that's the thing with my not knowing if they're cyborgs or not, because when they cut off his head, I didn't know that was a possibility for humans becoming cyborg, because that wasn't really explained before. And then they cut his head off. They didn't include the spinal column and everything. I thought that's what you needed as well, Right. So it made me easier to accept her death, because they just showed that people can become cyborgs, and maybe she's not really dead. She can come back.
Yeah, I don't think she's dead. Yeah.
Yeah, but I still think it was I don't know, kind of sudden, you know, and
Yeah.
I don't think it gave it the gravitas as well. And it's same thing for Mahershala Ali's death.
Yeah.
They built him up as the big bad, and you know he just kind of, you know, got stabbed and died. The same exact way as Luke Cage, where he just kind of, he's just dead now. Okay, well,
that's one thing I liked. I liked Grishka as a villain, and Jackie Earle Haley like completely disappears in that. I like this movie has a lot of characters, like a lot, and it does them all, almost all of them justice. So at least the main tier of characters. Like I said earlier, the nurse who's played by Adara Victor, she doesn't get enough lines. Jorge Lendeborg Jr. is in this. He was in Spider-Man: Homecoming. Lana Condor is in this. They're all people of color. They're all in the movie. There's lots of people of color in this movie, but they don't get as much to do as the white folks do. And so like that's kind of, you know, I mean, Rosa Salazar is Hispanic and she's the lead, so there is that. But one thing I wanted to mention is this movie's villain kind of stuff is a little weak. Like, I didn't think Mahershala Ali's character was really even that much of a villain. It's more the Nova controlling him.
Yeah,
but
well, listen, you said earlier that Nova wasn't really the villain; he was kind of the bad, you know. But I kind of felt
they just
him
don't
being,
deal with him
you know,
in the movie. I guess what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah.
He doesn't get dealt with. He's there looking down at... So the movie ends with Edward Norton, who plays Nova, which is kind of awesome. He's standing on his city, and he's looking down, and the idea is that he's looking down at Iron City, and he knows Alita's down there, and Alita's coming after him. But right now, she's just playing motorball, trying to win her way up. And so maybe eventually they'll face each other, and that's where the movie leaves you. But I wanted to ask you, in a post-Get Out world, what do you feel about the optics of a white guy body jacking a black guy whenever it feels like it? Because that was kind of strange to me.
I didn't even take it that deep.
No, I was just thinking about Get Out the whole time when that was going on.
I mean, what bothered me the most was that, I guess, the cyborg nicity once again, because we didn't see...
Wait a minute. Did you say cyborg nicity?
Cyborg nicity, yes, sir.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Coin that.
Yeah, we didn't see Mahershala Ali have a, you know, sword for an arm. He didn't do any cyborg stuff, but Nova could take over his body. So I guess once Nova did take over his body, I assumed that maybe he had some parts or something, and that's what
in his head. Yeah, he taps the side of his head at one point. And there's certain. I guess the implication is like there's cyborg stuff. Like even Sharon, she has that dot on her head. There's cyborg stuff that you can't, like, it doesn't have to be super big flashy stuff.
Yeah, that was the whatever you get when you're born up top or whatever.
Yeah, but I assume that it's got some kind of like technological. It probably does something, you know.
But with Mahershala Ali's character, if he was a, you know, robot, well, if he had robotic parts, he definitely should have put something. If he's a super bad guy, you got to have at least a knife or something, because you know, he didn't have anything to protect himself.
There should have been a bigger fight, maybe, but I think the idea was that Grishka was the big fight. And they lean in, and I thought Grishka was good. Although, like, they do the whole, like, you know, he's a big, gigantic monster, and Alita is contrasting with him physically. She's like in the sort of Elijah Unbreakable kind of like symbology there. The giant hulking symbolism. That's the word I want. The symbology. You know,
we're all making up words today.
Well, symbology is a word, but it means something different.
Okay.
I mix the two up sometimes. So symbolism of that is like, you know, this big hulking beast and this smaller kind of girl, right? And like she says, she's like, I'm just an insignificant girl. And she's saying it ironically because she's fighting this giant monster and she's handing him his
apple for
like the third or fourth time. And you know, so there's a certain amount of that works. But I wanted the villain. I wanted Mahershala Ali's villain to be heavier than he was.
Yeah, because that's why the end of the movie was kind of such a surprise.
Yeah,
because
it kind of just ends, right?
Yeah, and I probably would have preferred it end before she even walked out, but I guess we needed that 2 seconds to point up to Nova, and we needed to see that it was Edward Norton doing his best Kevin Spacey impression, being the bad guy that is, you know, uncredited, you know, so we don't know he's the bad guy. So I mean, the very end, you know, she points up at Nova, you know, he takes off his glasses and in credits. I think I would have liked it a little bit better actually if that never happened. Before she even walks out, when they hear the crowd, that's when it just cuts to black. I think that would have been better.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. I do kind of like the ending in the sense of like, if they're going to make a sequel, like, you know, like no matter what I said about it feeling like a pretty complete movie, that, you know, they want this to do well enough to make a sequel, because there's like a lot of material for them to use if they want to keep telling the story. But I kind of like the ending where they left it, but I don't know. I wonder.
Well, I guess it was surprising because the in battle was so anticlimactic.
Yeah,
You've seen him.
I
You've seen
agree.
her beat him 3 times. So what's the 4th time? That's no big deal.
I agree that
And then
anticlimactic.
Mahershala Ali just, gets stabbed and falls over, So then when she was tying up her shoes and the crowd was getting big, I was like, oh, this is where the movie ends.
Yeah.
Because there's no big final battle scene or whatever. And so, so then points to Ed Norton in credits. And, I think that's definitely, you were saying earlier that they didn't necessarily set it up for a sequel. I think that's 100% them.
Well, totally. That was a sequel moment. What I mean is like the whole movie isn't assuming, it's like, how some movies nowadays, they insist on the idea of there being an expanded universe or a sequel. The whole thing feels like, we'll get to the backstory in the next one. A lot of superhero movies don't have this problem anymore, but TV shows kind of do, where they'll do a whole season of like, this is the long form origin story of, before he became Green Arrow kind of thing, or whatever it is, before they became that character. And they feel like they have to like go through all this crap to like justify the moment where the character becomes the character we know. I didn't think this movie did that. This movie wasn't like an origin story in that way. It felt like a first chapter maybe, but not an origin story in the way that we're used to from other mediums, right? At least that's what I thought.
I think we just watched Unbreakable. We saw her origin story.
Oh, jeez.
Next movie, we know everything.
I made a mistake bringing up Elijah, but yeah, I think but I don't think you're wrong. Like Unbreakable's a nice touchstone for this because like it feels like that to me, where like you can kind of like when you're watching Unbreakable, it implies that there could be more stories about David Dunn. And I feel like, although, because Elijah doesn't die, you assume maybe those stories will involve Elijah. They have a very similar ending where, we get the closure of Elijah going to jail, but there's always the implication that there could be more clashes between these two people later on. 20 years later is a long time in comic book terms, but so what? In Alita, it's kind of the same thing. It's like it ends with, we know who the real villain is. There's a kind of stalemate between Alita and Nova. She's stuck in Iron City for now with no way of figuring out how to get to him. And he's up there, and he's probably going to keep sending assassins and trying to figure out ways to kill her. So it's kind of like a dynamic is established.
I know you're going to roll your eyes at this one, but since we brought it up,
I definitely think, to you.
Yeah, the end of Glass is very similar to the end of this, where they set it up where there are a whole bunch of possibilities as to what happens next.
Yeah.
But I think it's perfectly, if it never ends and this is the very end of the series, we never see it other than Alita, I think it's wrapped up just fine.
Yeah, and I more or less agree with you. My problem with the end of Glass and what I said about that stuff is a little different than that. It's like, it's got to do with that though. But I do agree with you that they ended it like, and Glass kind of ends like how Unbreakable did in a certain sense, with kind of like a statement of purpose and a dynamic that's introduced. Glass is half trying to end a bunch of stories and maybe imply some future ones, whereas Unbreakable to me felt like a more complete story on its own without needing any other stories. And I feel like Alita is kind of like that.
Indeed, yep. Yeah. And honestly, I mean, we set our pieces. So, yep. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like I said, it's, the beginning is a little wonky, it's a little bit anime-ish, yep. But I mean, I did enjoy it, and I definitely would recommend it. So, would you recommend Alita?
Big recommend. I especially hope that girls aged like 8 to 16 especially pick this one up, like they did with Wonder Woman, and like they probably will with Captain Marvel, because this movie's really for them in a way that it's not for us. And I think they're going to get the most out of it. They're going to love the romance angle because it's so sweet and earnest, kind of silly when you're, 32 and married and a dude, but it's I could see the sweetness. And it's got a bunch of really great action and a very uncompromised, I'll say, female protagonist.
All right, that has been this episode. Thanks for listening, guys. You can find more episodes on Spotify, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, and pretty much wherever you find podcasts. The actual podcast website, sirwaka.com/Sirr's Movies, where you can find all the episodes, and which each episode is a download link if you want to support the podcast. Next week, we'll be doing How to Train Your Dragon 3. Sam should be back for that episode, so tune in for that one. Evan, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at Evan Todd-McCoy, all one word, lowercase. You can also find my writing, spoiler-free reviews on sirwaka.com. Got one up for the Prodigy. And you can also find me on my own personal blog where I write slightly longer, more in-depth analysis, thunderclown.wordpress.com. I hope to have a review for Lego Movie 2 and a review for Alita Battle Angel put up there sometime in the next couple of weeks. So look for those.
Indeed. You can follow the podcast, as I said, at Sirr's Movies. If you do have a Twitter, please follow us, share with your friends, leave a review on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you listen to it, so we can gain some more followers. Share it with your friends so we can more people can enjoy the show. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next week.
See ya.